Alright, so today my mending and upcycling pile has sort of like a little bit of everything. I have projects for my husband, projects for myself, projects for my daughter, some kitchen stuff that definitely needs some attention. I have some stuff that needs to be remade in a little Halloween transformation and whatnot. So if you have a pile of mending, upcycling, unfinished projects, and whatever else that's been sitting right there in the corner staring at you, then definitely grab it. Let's do it together. Now my first project is going to be to tackle these jeans and the tear in the crotch area. Now spoiler alert, I did actually also add a maternity panel to these jeans, but that you will be able to see in my 5 maternity upcycles video, which is already live on the channel, so if you want to, check it out. Now this tear is kind of unique in its own way because to my eye it doesn't look like a naturally occurring one. It actually looks like a man-made one, and these jeans actually came from Fab Scrap, and that's a place where I do get my fabric scraps. They recycle fabric scraps from the design houses in New York, but they also do the same with production samples of clothing. And a lot of times the samples that they have, they might be missing like half of the pant leg, they might be missing a sleeve, they might have like a wrong zipper in or whatnot. Sometimes they also feature just really odd cuts here and there, and I think that this is one of them. As always, the first step is to assess the damage, and as you can see, the tear or the cut is very close to the crotch seam itself. So first, in this case, I want to bring the fabric back together by using fusible interfacing. This is a roll of fusible tricot interfacing that I use for pretty much everything when I sew from scratch, when I upcycle, when I mend, when I experiment with some interesting projects. It's a very multifunctional roll of interfacing. And I try to make sure that the fabric edges butt against each other, but because the rip is in such an awkward place, the fabric just kept sliding away, so I needed to add a step in between. Here I grabbed a water-soluble thread and stitched the tear together before fusing the interfacing, so that way I know that it wouldn't pull apart as I tried to finagle that interfacing inside and then fuse it. The beauty of water-soluble thread is that once it has contact with water, it just simply dissolves. Now I can finally apply the interfacing and fuse it with iron without the fear of fabric sliding away. Now on the right side of the garment, I actually have quite a bit of white fuzz showing from the edges of the tears, which sometimes does make mending a little bit more difficult. So in order to make it easier on myself, I'm grabbing fabric markers and we're going to shade it in a little bit just to even out the color. I do work with fabric markers quite a bit, but as always, if this is your first time, practice on a small piece of fabric so that way you're sure of what you're doing. Next, I'm going to choose the thread that matches the blue of the jeans the best. And I don't really have a good option here, so in those cases, my rule of thumb is to go with a color that's slightly darker than the actual fabric. For a tear like this, I will go for a wide zigzag stitch that is very tightly spaced, otherwise known as a satin stitch. From here, I simply go over the necessary area, making sure that the stitch catches both sides of the cut, and then of course I stop and readjust as needed. Now here I wanted to say that there are many ways how you can mend your jeans. You know, I've done it by hand, I've done it with a buttonhole and a mending function on my sewing machine, I've done a crosshatch technique, and each one of them is slightly different for a slightly different situation. As always, you have to choose what's best for you and what is going to work in your particular case. Now it really is difficult to make it really invisible because at the end of the day, it is a cut or a tear and it's a repair, plus we're working with fabric that isn't all even in color. But I want to give you a little bit of encouragement because when you're dealing with something that is sort of like in permanent shadow, like, you know, in the underarm section or in a crotch area, that sort of like disguises that area a little bit, plus it adds that dark color to it, the dark color of the shadow. So once you do the repair, it might not even be visible to the outside eye at all because of the position of the initial tear or cut. I really can't see the repair unless the jeans are flat on the table, so for me, this mending job is a win. Alright, next up we have the shirt for my husband. It's a new shirt, seemingly nothing wrong, but there is one detail that drives me absolutely crazy. So let's take a look at this. Instead of doing a regular hem where you would do a narrow double fold and then stitch it down and closing all of the raw edges, or even serging and then doing a single fold, they actually just serged and left it as is. Now here's an interesting fact. If you're wearing your shirts tucked in, this kind of hem actually plays into your advantage because it's less bulky, so it doesn't create that pronounced line in the pants when it's tucked in, seen on the outside. So this at times can be really helpful, but my husband does wear it out all the time, so with many washes this is gonna get worse and worse. And you know what, I actually really love creating hems on my serger. I really do. I have a full series about how to do some really cool stuff on your serger. I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, well, why couldn't they just make that serger seam a little tighter space so that way it would cover more of that edge of the fabric, which would definitely help the issue. But you know what, it is what it is, and we're just gonna fix it up. And that's it. I'm going to start by giving this area a really good press so that way it's easier for us to work. And next, pick a thread color that would match, and after that decide if you're going to do a single fold or a double fold. Now I asked my husband and he said that single fold hem is going to be just fine, so single fold it is. To achieve a nice and neat result, I'm going to fold in the hem about 3/8 of an inch to the wrong side of the garment and give it a really good press. That will also help me to avoid using a ton of pins. Next, at the sewing machine, just with a simple straight stitch that's slightly longer than a regular one, I'm gonna go ahead and stitch down the hem. I'm simply lining up the edge of the presser foot with the edge of the hem because I know that the distance between the edge of the presser foot and the needle is slightly less than 3/8 of an inch, so I know that everything is going to be caught with the stitch that I'm doing. The whole thing took just a couple of minutes, but I do think that such a small detail actually makes a big difference, especially in a shirt like this one where you wear it out. And also, it isn't such a horrible eyesore anymore, so that is done. And this next one is going to be quite a bit of fun. So my daughter wants to go for Halloween, and Halloween here is just around the corner, as the Wicked Witch of the West. So we got a hat. Then, as the main dress, she's actually going to wear a dress that I wore, that my mom made for me when I was my daughter's age. So this is about 30 years old or so. And I know it's not necessarily like the dress that Alphabet is wearing, but it's black and it has green and it's sparkly. So my daughter's like, yes, I'm wearing this for Halloween. And the one thing that we're missing is a black cape. So I have this black dress that is all sorts of, you know, interesting for a lack of better word. It is also from Fab Scrap, so it was a production sample. It has some fabric that's unraveling at the edges. I think there's like a busted zipper or something. And I know for sure that I'm not going to wear it even if I fix it, and nobody around me is going to wear it as well. But the color is black, it's a velvet, and I thought it would be perfect if we remake it into a cape. As always, let's get started by taking a look at what we're working with. So here's the dress on the table, and it has a rather long slit in the dress. So I'm thinking we can play around with this slit as the opening of the cape, and then the entire skirt should be enough for what we have in mind. Oh, I wanted to show you, some of these production samples have really fun and interesting tags of how the samples were made and just different markings, and I don't know, I always find it quite fascinating. Now, velvet is quite a thick fabric, so I'm going to start by actually sharpening my scissors, otherwise it can be quite a challenging job. Next, I'm going to cut the slit open all the way up And from here, we are going to separate the skirt from the bodice. It just so happened that my little one was actually sick, so she was staying at home, and she was feeling a little bit better, so she wanted to participate. So you will see two of us working on this project. It did take us a little while, but we finally did separate the skirt from the bodice. And the next step is to try it on the body and just to see what's the length of the cape, how much fabric do we have, and how does it actually look. From there, I made a decision that I'm going to preserve the slit that we cut open and also the bottom hem. And if I align the skirt to the bottom hem, then the top is all jumbled up, and that makes sense because the actual dress was asymmetrical. At this step, you can see that I'm freehanding a really nice curved neckline of the cape. We've also decided not to use the entire fabric for the cape. Instead, make it a little less wide and then use the rest of the fabric in order to make a hood. For the construction, we sewed the center back seam of the cape on a serger, and then I did gather the neckline on a sewing machine first to bring it down to the size that we need, and at the same time create that volume in the cape. Whatever fabric was left over we used to create the hood, but I wasn't particularly in the mood of hemming the velvet, so instead of cutting in the direction of the nap, I actually cut against, which is something that you wouldn't do in serious sewing, but you know what, this is for a playtime costume, so it will work. I'm also drafting the hood right on the fabric. Now, if you do need step-by-step instructions on how to draft an actual hood for your garments, costumes, and whatnot, then I do have multiple videos on how to do that step-by-step, explaining the ins and outs. As always, you'll be able to find all of those videos on my channel or in a description right underneath this video. When that is done, all we have to do is sew the center back seam of the hood, and after that, attach the hood to the neckline of the cape. As the final touch for the closure, we decided to create little knot buttons. It's a beautiful little technique that I spotted in one of the sewing books that I have. And by the way, if you are a member of this channel, first of all, thank you so much for your support. And you do have a full book review and flip through of this particular one, which is just fabulous and full of interesting ideas. So definitely take a look at all of your members' perks and make the most of them. And if you are not a member and you're not sure what memberships are all about, you can always take a look. There's a link in the description. To attach it, I simply used a hand sewing needle and thread. And now let's take a look at the final result. To complete the entire thing, we even got some green face paint, so I think this is going to be really fun. And there's something really special about sort of bringing two generations together and combining these two things, you know, something that my mom made for me when I was my daughter's age, and then something that my daughter and I worked on together. Next up, we have another project for my husband, and well, we gotta get rid of this really big stain that's like smack in the middle of this relatively new polo shirt. Neither of us really know how the stain got there, and my husband already tried quite a few remedies to sort of try to get rid of it, and it seems, I kid you not, it seems like every time it actually gets worse and worse and worse. So, per his suggestion and his idea was, what if we just bleach the entire thing and then dye it one color? Dyeing fabric is something that I do quite often, but I've never bleached fabric or bleached a garment and then dyed it a different color. So I'm gonna give this shirt to my husband. He's gonna go and do the thing with the bleach, and after that, I'm gonna dye it. Well, much to our surprise, the stain didn't budge at all. The overall color of the shirt did become a little bit lighter. Now it has a slight sort of like pink tinge to it, but bleach really didn't do much, and the stain is quite clearly visible and it's quite clearly there. So I'm actually rethinking this upcycle, because the only color that would cover the stain would be black. And I do have black fiber reactive dye, but sometimes getting a really dark pitch black is really difficult. At times you might get more like a purple black, sometimes more like a bluish grayish black. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, if we do black and it doesn't work out, then the shirt is done. It's done and that's it. If I leave it like this, however, then I can use it and reuse it to make something for my daughter or something for myself. And I do have ideas already turning in my head. We're just not going to do them today because that was not the plan. I don't necessarily have a lot of time for it, but the wheels are turning and I'm just thinking to set it aside. So not everything turns out, but I do want to show you a successful result of dyeing something that did have a stain. So this was from last year and I think I've never showed this to you. These were completely white and my daughter wore it just a couple of times as with any white clothing with kids, and of course she got some stains on the knees and whatnot from playing on the playground. And originally we needed pink tights anyway, but they didn't have pink in the store, so we bought white. And after I tried to get the stains out, I was like, you know what, I just really don't feel like dealing with white tights every single time. So I asked her, hey, do you want to have fun and dye these? And she was like, oh yes. And I was kind of swaying her towards one single color, but she really wanted to do sort of like a rainbow. So this is what she did. And she wore them last year with all of the colorful stuff that she has, and they served us really well. As of this very moment, they are too small, but there are positive and successful examples of transforming the color of your clothes as a way of upcycling and giving them longer life. Next up, we have another project for my daughter. Now, these shorts came from a box from a ThredUp. It was a box that was described as fabric and materials, and that was a huge mistake on my part. But aside from that, in the box there were these shorts. They have no fabric tag on them, but they do feel like cotton or cotton linen blend or something of that nature. And my daughter spotted them and she was asking if I could remake these to fit her. Now, she could use an extra bottom for this very season, so I thought, okay, that's a valid request. Would you like this as a skirt or would you like this as shorts? What do you think?
I think I would like it as a skirt.
Skirt, you think?
Uh-huh.
All right. I think we can manage that.
Okay. Well, what do you think it will go well with, like the top?
I think you have a butterfly t-shirt, right? And then maybe a bunny jacket. I wanted to leave that little part of conversation where she asks about what do you think is gonna go well with that skirt in the video, because ever since she was very little, we've been having these ongoing conversations about not only what you want in the moment and what you're really drawn to and attracted to, but also what are you actually going to do with it? How is it going to serve you? And in terms of clothes, where and how are you going to wear that? Because anytime we would go to the fabric store or we would shop for fabric online together, of course she gravitates to everything sparkly and super colorful, and that's her personality. She just loves all of that stuff and everything girly and puffy dresses and this and that. But the reality is that most of the people have a ton of clothes in their wardrobe and still nothing to wear. And in my experience, it's much better to have a smaller amount, but something that you can wear with comfort and joy at any point of your life. And I was really happy when she asked that question, because it means that it clicks that, aha, yes, getting something new, whether it's handmade or from the store, is really awesome. but you also have to think about how it's going to serve you and where are you actually going to wear it. So I did try these on my daughter, and it turns out that I only have to bring in the waist by about 3 inches or so. And I think I can do that by simply cinching the elastic, since right here on top we have that really pretty paper bag effect. Now she does want a skirt, so before we can move on to that part, I actually have to remove the stitching on the hem and let out the hem, and then we have to turn the shorts into a skirt. In some cases, I can simply cut the hem off, but in this case, I really need all the extra fabric I can get. So definitely making sure that I take out the stitches and preserve as much fabric as I can. Now that the hems are undone, we're going to take care of center front and center back. And because we're working with stripes, it's actually quite easy. Option number 1 would be to cut this apart and then do it. Option number 2 would be to sew this first and then cut the necessary extras away. So here I have the orange and the brown stripe and this brown stripe, and I need to make sure that I bring them together so that way I straighten out the center front and it looks more like a skirt. Now before we sew this all together, I have repositioned the pins from the outside to the inside so that way we can actually stitch it. And now let's head to the sewing machine. Once both sides are sewn together, here they are, we can now turn this wrong side out and cut along the stitching line that we just did, so that way we can remove what made them shorts and make them into a skirt. When you're going to be cutting, make sure that you cut at least 3/8 of an inch away from the stitching line that we made, so that way we can finish the raw edges of the seam allowances and make sure that they don't fray after wash and wear. Next, I'm going to unfold this hem and give this a really good press all the way around. As you can see, the hem is quite uneven. That's because in shorts and pants, the back is usually higher like this than the front. But since we're working on a skirt, we're just gonna bring the top edges all together and then we're going to tidy up the hem. Now we can go back to the center front and center back and finish the seam allowances right over here. With no particular rhyme or reason, I'm just going to use an overcast stitch on my sewing machine to do that, but you can also use a tightly spaced zigzag stitch or a serger if you have one. From here we have 2 issues. Number 1, we have the fold of the hem that is quite visible, and number 2 is that the skirt now is about, I would say, close to 3 inches too short, so we need to add something to it. And I've asked my daughter what she wants to do, and she said that, well, how about we add a ruffle? I went through my fabric scraps and I found this beautiful orange that matches really closely to the orange in a skirt, and then of course I have just white linen, and I offered these 2 options to my daughter and she was insistent on doing the white, and I was like, well, but the orange. She's like, nope, white it is. So okay, we're gonna go with a white ruffle. With that, I also pulled out white twill tape that I have. It's just 1/4 of an inch wide, so it's a really tiny one, but I'm thinking to use it as sort of like a trim to cover that other fold of the hem that is now really visible. So that way we will have white trim and then a white ruffle. Now, because the original hem of the shorts is quite uneven from one side to another, I can't really use it as a guide to attaching that twill tape. So here I'm measuring equal distance from the hem all the way up and then marking it all the way around. And I'm going to use those markings to attach a twill tape. I will do that by using a simple straight stitch, one on each side of the twill tape. After that, I'm going to use the linen fabric scraps in order to cut the ruffle. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail how I'm going to do the ruffle because we've done it like a gazillion times on the channel, but I must say that I think the little one was onto something, because I think the white ruffle was the right decision to make. So, you know what? She's got a good eye. After the ruffle is attached and all of the raw edges have been enclosed, the last thing to do is adjust the waist. And here I had the biggest brain fart ever. If you remember, at the very beginning of this upcycle, I thought that with the waistband it's going to be straightforward. I'm just going to open up the waistband and cinch in the elastic and that's about it. And I am not sure why, but I did not take into the account at all the method of construction of that waistband, where the elastic is sandwiched in the middle and it's stitched down, so it doesn't actually move within the waistband. So there's absolutely no way that I can make a little cut on the inside and then pull in the elastic, because elastic doesn't freely move. So it's quite a mess that I got myself into, because now I have to figure out how do I need to reduce the waistband by 3 inches without taking everything absolutely apart. Option number 1 that comes to mind is to go from the center back seam. So to measure 1.5 inches on each side of the seam and then taper it to nothing all the way to the hem, so that way I don't have to redo the hem that I've just made. Now, it's not a bad option at all, but I had another idea that came to mind while I was working on this. So instead of doing one big intake at the center back, I would separate it into 2, sort of like a small dart on each side of the center back seam. Also, instead of stitching throughout the entire body of the skirt all the way to the hem, I'm going to stitch just through the elastic. I think that this will do all the things that I need. It will keep the overall volume of the skirt, but reduce the volume at the waistband, and it's still going to look nice. With that, this upcycle is done and ready to go. Now, I must say that it's definitely not my style, but my daughter loves it. She already wore it to school, and the temperatures right now are still in the 80s, so this is very much weather appropriate with just a little t-shirt and sandals. But I can also see this being worn with tights and a little cardigan, getting closer to Thanksgiving. So overall, I think this is going to get quite a bit of wear, and I'm really happy about that. And as I mentioned, she was onto something. You know, that white ruffle actually looks really nice. All right, I have 2 more projects to do, so let's get done and sort of out of the way with the easier one. And here, I swear I have no clue how did this happen, but it obviously did happen, is just a cleaning towel for the kitchen. So yeah, I'm just gonna cut it apart for smaller cleaning rags, hem it, and that's it. Definitely not much to report here, just a very simple, very quick household repair, but it had to be done so that way we can move on to this next one. And here I have another production sample from Fab Scrap. This time it's a pair of jumpsuit overalls that I don't particularly like. I do think that I look like a Teletubby while I'm wearing these, because these are also not full length. And at this point you might be asking, well, Alisa, if you don't particularly like these, why did you order these? Well, when you order production samples from Fab Scrap, you don't know what you're getting. You can only select size and what type of garment you want, like tops, bottoms, jackets, outerwear, and whatnot. So it's kind of like a blind pick. You really don't know what you're getting. So I was curious about the production samples. I did a small order quite some time ago, and therefore now I'm working through these upcycles. Just like the jeans from the first upcycle, this jumpsuit also features weird cuts, this time on the sides of the jumpsuit, so that's that. But overall, my idea is to turn these into very simple pregnancy lounge pants. It seems like the task should be rather simple, but we do have a couple of issues. One of them is that the crotch area, if I scoot it down, is very, very, very low, so we're going to need to rework that. This production sample doesn't feature a fabric tag, but from the feel of the fabric and the way it acts, it seems that it's some sort of a bamboo rayon mix. It is a knit, it stretches quite a bit, which works in my advantage. And the first step, as you can see, is removing the top of the jumpsuit, since we're not going to need it. Next, I'm going to place the jumpsuit flat, and I'm going to mark with a pin the front part of it, since there's just a lot of fabric and sometimes it can get lost. And after that, I'm going to cut apart the crotch seam. Once that is done, we will have the left and right legs separate from each other. After that, I decided to grab a regular knit pant pattern that I drafted a long time ago. It is drafted for my regular size, however, so what I'm trying to do is to see if I can recut the jumpsuit following the pattern that I have with some minor adjustments for pregnancy wear. Now, when you're making these kind of decisions, you have to be really careful because not all fabric stretches equally the same. Some fabrics stretch more, some fabrics stretch less. But you have to have a really good feel and understanding that whatever you need, the amount of stretch that you need, that your fabric is going to be able to handle it. Now, when I place the front pattern piece on the existing pant leg, it seems that everything is just fine. But then when I place the back pattern piece, we can clearly see that we don't have enough of the width of the fabric to cut the crotch area. We can also see that there's barely enough of the length of the fabric in order to cut a full-length pant, so that could be a little bit challenging as well. And in this case, since I'm not going to be preserving the inseam, my next step will be to cut it apart, so that way it makes my life easier with the progress of this upcycle. I'm going to start cutting my pattern pieces with the front, and I actually don't want exactly the same pattern as I have right over here with sort of like a slim leg. I just want a straight leg from the hip all the way down. So here you can see that I'm drafting it right on the fabric because that way I can clearly see the limitations of the existing fabric that I have and what I can do with it. Now, drafting directly on the fabric, whether you're upcycling or sewing with a full yardage, is definitely possible, but I must say that it does take a little bit of practice. So if you're just not sure, it's better to actually do that on a paper first, so that way you don't get frustrated, because drafting on fabric, it can be challenging. And then after you're done with the paper pattern, transfer that onto your fabric. This is where I'm going to do a minor pregnancy adjustment. Right here on top, instead of cutting as the pattern goes, I'm actually going to leave it as is because I want the front curve of the crotch come up higher up the belly. For the pant leg itself, I'm going to follow all of the same steps as I did when drafting the pant leg for the front. But then for the crotch area, I'm going to outline on an extra piece of pattern paper the piece that I'm missing. Then from whatever fabric scraps I have left, I'm going to cut that missing piece, but please make sure if you do the same to cut it in a correct direction of the stretch. Next, of course, to make sure that you have a full back pattern piece, we will need to combine these two, and I will sew them together on a serger. Also, before moving on, I decided to get rid of the pockets, and I know this is such a controversial thing, but believe me, this fabric is way too light to support these pockets. It's just way too droopy, and I absolutely hate when we have pockets but they're not actually functional. After that, we're simply going to combine the front and the back pattern pieces to create the left and the right pant leg. Next step would be to combine them two at the crotch seam, and for that I like to use a leg-in-leg method. Let me show you how the crotch area looks, and it does seem a little Frankenstein-y, I totally get you, but it's so deep in the crotch that just like in the first jean upcycle and mending, you won't be able to see it at all as you're wearing. The final thing for me to do is to add a waistband, and here we have another issue. The thing is, all of the fabric scraps that I have left over are actually in the wrong direction of grain or stretch. But luckily for me, this fabric stretches almost equally in all four directions. So I'm just going to cut it against the original direction of the grain, and that way I'll get myself a waistband. I think it's time. Let's take a look at the final result. I think these turned out more like a wide leg yoga pants. So here's the look from the front. Here you can also see how they come up the belly, which is really comfortable. So they sit right around and create a straight line all the way. Here's also the look from the buttocks, and I'll try to show you that you can't really see that piece that we pieced in the crotch area unless you really look into that crotch area. And if somebody does that, then we definitely have a different kind of issue there. Overall, they're very comfy, very lightweight, super easy to wear, but I wish that they would be just a tad longer. But for lounge pants, wearing around home and getting stuff done, these are perfect. I hope that you enjoyed spending time together and then this kind of video gave you more ideas and creativity. Now, if you've been wondering how do you put together a cohesive handmade wardrobe, then I do have a perfect video for you. Take a look right over here. I think that also gives you a different perspective of how not only have joy from upcycling and sewing, but also how to put it all together in a wardrobe that works for you. Until next time, happy, thoughtful sewing. I'll see you soon. Bye!